Bright lights, it gonna set my soul.
But money greases the wheels. There's a lot going through Las Vegas.
You have beauty, riches, intrigue, mystery.
Viva Las Vegas. Viva Las Vegas.
Infamous convicted killer, Margaret Rudin.
Margaret Rudin locked up for about 2 decades.
This story is an absolute roller coaster. It's one of those fact is stranger than fiction.
After 4 failed marriages, Ron met Margaret Rudin.
Her millionaire husband.
And deal, that's motive, 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 motive.
Ron was shot and killed, we know that. And then the question is, who's behind it?
Margaret Rudin indicted on murder charges.
A lot of people thought that Margaret Rudin had to be innocent. Others believe that she basically is the most evil person on the face of this earth.
Margaret Rudin, unfazed, stoic, cold.
Killed him for money. Fled the scene.
You spot Margaret Rudin, call our hotline of 1-800-CRIME-TV.
Black Widow. That's the persona from the media coverage and the fact that she was charged and convicted of murder.
We find the defendant guilty.
Just out of prison after a 20-year sentence, Margaret Rudin sat down with 2020 to tell her story and talk about how she's still fighting to clear her name.
I am Margaret Rudin Mason. I did not kill Ron. They zeroed in on me.
She's been locked up for the past 20 years for the brutal beheading and murder of her millionaire husband, Ron Rudin.
They had no evidence. They had no witnesses.
Margaret Rudin, dubbed the Black Widow of Las Vegas. Black Widow.
Black Widow.
They stuck the name on me that Black Widow, Black Widow, Black Widow, like I had killed somebody before, or like that I was in the habit. I think that people don't know me. They don't try to know.
Margaret Rudin is a chameleon. She's been a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead.
I like change. I'm a Gemini.
She's a chameleon, definitely.
I like to wear wigs. I like short, I like long, I like curly, I like straight. I don't want to look the same way all the time. Even when I sit in front of your cameras, I may look different. But you're still going to know it's me.
I'm Greg Mullinex. I'm an attorney here in Fresno, California, and I represent Margaret Rudin. There's so many holes in this case. After going through all this stuff, considering everything, I'm convinced that Margaret Rudin's innocent. She was wrongly convicted.
Even though it's circumstantial, all the evidence pointed to Margaret Rudin. I'm 100% convinced that Margaret was responsible for Ron's death.
It was a mystery, which, quite truthfully, to this day hasn't been solved.
What happened to Ron? We still don't know. 20 years later, they never checked on anyone but me. I want the truth to come out. I have waited a long time.
This story really starts in Las Vegas in the 1960s.
Got a funny feeling this is going to be a long show, boys.
We're talking old school Vegas, where Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack held court in the Sands Hotel, and the mob's tentacles ran deep.
Good old times. It was smooth. Everything is nice and smooth. But underneath that river of calmness was a
point across, so you knew, don't screw with us because we will kill you. It's pretty simple.
It was into this risky, freewheeling environment that 30-year-old Ron Rudin landed in Las Vegas in 1960 with big dreams of making his fortune in real estate.
Ron saw great things that could transpire in Las Vegas back then. I love this picture. It's like he's looking at you, saying, hey, I'm Ron Rudin, and I have a lot of plans for my future.
He bought a strip mall, he had his office right there. But in the 80s and the 90s, when the explosion of construction hit in Las Vegas, that is when he started to make his real fortune.
He watched Las Vegas just explode, and he was part of that with his real estate business.
You could make a killing, and that's exactly what Ron Rudin did.
So this is old Vegas. But what was Ron's reputation like around these parts?
Ron's reputation, he had a reputation of being a hard-nosed businessman.
Some people will say that Ron Rudin was unscrupulous, that it was anything at all costs to make money.
He didn't like the glitz and the glitter. Ron Rudin wasn't a casino guy, but he absolutely made a name for himself in Sin City.
He was one of the characters here in Las.
That's what he drove, the black Cadillac.
He wasn't afraid to show off that he had made it. He knew he was on top of the pile.
Women were attracted to Ron Rudin, and a lot of it was because of his lifestyle and his money. And he absolutely loved playing the love game.
In a twinkle, he was very handsome, not just your average handsome. He really stood out.
And when it came to his marriages, Ron went through wives like a casino dealer goes through packs of cards.
Ron Rudin was married a total of 5 times, and each one of those marriages was its own story.
Ron's first marriage in 1962 to wife Donna lasted less than a year. After about an 8-year hiatus, he gets hitched to his second wife, Carolyn. While their marriage eventually failed, Ron kept a bracelet that she gave him with his name on it in diamonds, and he never took that thing off.
Peggy was Ron's third wife, and this one appeared to be a happy marriage. But behind closed doors, Peggy suffered from severe depression, and that depression would manifest itself in the way of suicide. Peggy put a gun to her own head in the couple's bedroom.
The gun that she used to kill herself with had Ron's fingerprints on it. It raised eyebrows. People thought maybe he killed Peggy.
But there was a full investigation into her death, and it was, in fact, ruled a suicide.
After getting married and splitting up for a 4th time, this time with Wet Mason.
Well, I had made a joke to one of my friends that went to our church. I had said to her, the very next husband I have is going to wear cowboy boots, because in Vegas, that means they're macho, and I like macho.
Yeah, that's her Southern background.
So one day she said, there's a guy over there behind us that keeps looking at you, and he's wearing cowboy boots.
Well, she was very smitten with him.
I tell you, I've never met anybody better and slicker and smarter and suaver than he was.
She just seemed like a really sweet person. And then I started hearing, you know, the other stuff.
She didn't really realize what she had gotten into.
One night, he said to me quietly, what would you say if I told you I murdered Peggy?
Going to the chapel and we're gonna get married.
I think I fall in love too easily. But I don't regret them.
Gee, I really love you.
Margaret would never have a problem finding a husband. It's like Liz Taylor, you know.
I have a thing with men. I want to be needed. I need to be needed. I was born in Memphis. I am the oldest in the family. I have 3 daughters.
Her mother seemed like a really nice, warm person, in contrast with her dad, who I think was a strict religious guy.
We could not wear shorts, wear slacks, cut our hair. You weren't supposed to do anything for pleasure. When Elvis Presley was the rage, he refused to let us watch him on TV because of his gyrations.
She was always traveling and stuff. She went to a bunch of schools, like 10 or 15, something like that.
My father was a barber. He would open a new barber shop, stay there until he got tired of the place, and so we'd move someplace else.
So Margaret settled down and got married.
I was married to Jerry Mason, right out of high school.
She had 2 children, Michael and a daughter, Christina. They lived just north of Chicago along Lake Michigan.
I wanted the white picket fence. We had it. They had the dog, they had the swings, they had all the things that I never had.
She really seemed to have a perfect life, a settled life, until she didn't.
My husband had an affair. I went to real estate school, got my license, and found I could make it on my own. So I did.
But for Margaret, it was hardly one and done when it came to marriage. Over the following years, she would quickly marry and divorce 2 more husbands.
I think I'm easy to be married to because I'm a people pleaser. That's why none of the men in my life ever asked me for a divorce. Not one. I always had to bring it up first.
By 1981, Margaret was looking for a fresh start in life, so she moved to Las Vegas, where she got married and split up with husband number 4. But just 4 months after the divorce, she decides to roll the dice again and marry wealthy Vegas realtor Ron Rudin.
There are a total of 8 combined previous marriages, but from the beginning, it looks promising.
The thing that I liked the most about Ron was he had a very dry wit, and he was fun to be around. Did you want to hear he was the best lover I ever had?
They made a dynamic, good-looking couple. By all rights, they should have had a wonderful life.
For Margaret, she says everything darkened when she moved into Ron's house, which was located right behind the strip mall and his office.
She did not know that the house had not been renovated since Peggy's suicide.
One night, he said to me, quietly, "What would you say if I told you I murdered Peggy?" And I kind of caught my breath, and I didn't know what to say, because if I'd have said, "Yes, I want the details," I would have had to have left. I just said, "No, no, you're not going to relieve your guilt by telling me I don't want to know." He said, "Okay." And we never brought it up again.
From a distance, they look like
It wouldn't be long before Margaret discovers that Ron is having an affair with an IRS agent.
In Margaret's case, she was allegedly having an affair with a man named Yehuda Sharon. He claims to be a former officer in the Mossad, which is Israel's intelligence agency.
We weren't having an affair because I was married. If I hadn't have been married, he wasn't my type.
Sharon also denied there was an affair, but the mutual jealousy and suspicion all came to a head one night when Margaret says she overheard Ron talking to a woman that he dated before they got married.
And we got into an argument because the closest to death I was ever going to get. By the look on his face, And I said, okay, that's it, I'm out of here. And he said, no, 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 you don't have to go. I promise you nothing like that'll ever happen again.
They went and had some counseling. She got to understand him a little bit better. She loved him. She really didn't want to divorce him.
It was Ron that went back to get Margaret. And people believe that Margaret stayed with Ron because she, at this point, was after his money.
I called him, and he says, Margaret's diagramming out how she's going to split up all my money. And he says, I'm really getting nervous. I told him, you better watch your back.
And to add to Ron's worries, at the time, he was knee-deep in a massive real estate development deal that he was struggling to get financing for.
We're up here at the Lee Canyon property that Ron Rudin owned. It's near Mount Charleston. It's about an hour outside of Las Vegas, at about 8,000 feet. And Ron had hoped to make a development up here. And apparently, Ron was expecting an offer on this property.
He had several million invested in this project called the Retreat at Lee Canyon.
Lee Canyon is currently a ski resort, but in the 90s, there were questions raised about how Ron was funding his plans for an RV resort at the location.
Ron, at one point, apparently approached some people that were affiliated with organized crime seeking, money to help develop this place.
Well, he got paranoid. The older he got and the worse he was drinking, and he really started getting paranoid.
Maybe he thought an ominous directive he made about his fortune was about to come true.
Ron almost seemed to predict his fate by putting in his will that if I were to ever die of foul play, look at the people around me who stand to benefit from this fortune.
So that tells you something's not quite right. What would make a man have his attorney draw up a directive that says, in the event that I die under any strange circumstances, my death is to be investigated thoroughly?
I think he was frightened.
In December of 1994, Margaret Rudin was really excited about a new antique business that her husband Ron helped her set up.
December 17th was Margaret's grand opening of her new antique store in Ron's strip mall. It was her big opening that weekend.
Ron came because he kind of played host, like, this is my shop, this is my wife. I was excited about it because Ron was happy and being supportive. I thought it was going to all work out and be perfect.
Margaret leaves the grand opening and goes home. She and Ron had a plan to go to a movie, and that didn't work out, so she decides, let's go back to the antique store.
She said she closed the antique store late, very late. She went over to see another tenant and, just to talk and chat.
Margaret claims she went back home at about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Ron's car wasn't there. The burglar alarm wasn't on. And I thought, well, that's strange. I thought, I'm so tired, I'm just gonna go to bed. Maybe he did go meet somebody.
Next morning, Ron's employees get to the real estate office and there's no sign of Ron Rudin.
Uniformly, all his coworkers and friends said he was in the office every morning, 8 a.m., very dependable. The fact he didn't show up was so unusual.
Ron Rudin is one of these guys who tells people where he is at all times. He is never, ever missing. And now he is.
I knew something he was going to be doing that most people didn't know about. He was selling the Lee Canyon property on Wednesday. So I knew that he might want to see it one last time.
The first thing Margaret did on Monday morning when Ron wasn't home is she called her friend up on the mountain and said, have you seen Ron up there? And Ron used to keep a trailer up here. He would just spend the night in the trailer. And so they searched the whole property, and there was no sign of Ron.
She called all the relatives. She sounded very frightened, and she said, I don't know where Ron is. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's happened to him.
I called missing persons the 19th, and the cop said, call us back when it's been 48 hours.
Ron's coworkers and friends were immediately suspicious of Margaret.
I call in the morning, the secretary says, he didn't come in this morning. I says, uh-oh. I turned to my wife. I says, I think Margaret did something to Ron.
And detectives did a cursory search of the shop and the house. At that time, they didn't find anything that would give them, cause to investigate any further. When the detectives talked to her, she didn't seem to be worried about Ron being missing. She seemed to be more concerned about his finances.
The suspicion only grew after investigators learned about that ominous directive that Ron added to his trust.
Ron wrote in his will that if any of his beneficiaries were involved in his death, either directly or indirectly, that they should receive nothing.
The will that if I die a violent death, take extraordinary means to investigate. So certainly there is a lot of motive there for Margaret.
The police think this was about money, and that Margaret was greedy and she wanted his fortune.
Margaret and the two trustees of Ron's estate were among the beneficiaries. According to Ron's attorney, Ron said Margaret was becoming, quote, vicious and violent. Without naming Margaret specifically, in 1991, Ron executed that secret directive to the trustees. 2 years later, though, things between them seemed to have improved, so Ron increased her share.
Well, he increased it finally, I think it was 60%. And you generally don't give more to people that you're having a problem with.
Because the cops were so focused on Margaret right out of the gate, they may have been overlooking another possible motive in Ron's disappearance, that huge Lee Canyon development project.
Now, this deal that he was working on, he disappeared 2 days before he was due to settle. Well, that's motive.
And so that was one of the theories early on in the case, is that perhaps that dealing, that purchase, was perhaps behind the killing of Ron Rudin.
Ron Rudin is missing for 4 days, and then a huge development.
We heard that they found his Cadillac.
This is the Crazy Horse 2 Gentlemen's Club here in Las Vegas. And the significance of this place is right behind this building is where Ron Rudin's car was found.
Was there anything unusual about the condition of the car when they found it?
Yes, it was backed into space for one thing, and then it was covered with dirt and mud, and like it had been rained on in the dirt. And then inside the vehicle, they found 4 sets of muddy footprints. Ron was very meticulous with his car. He even hired a guy to keep his car clean.
Now, I never believed that Ron had driven the Cadillac to the Topless Club. I always believed that it was placed there by someone that was involved.
There were muddy footprints in the car, and they recovered fingerprints that didn't belong to either Ron or Margaret. It might be an indication that, the car was clean.
Police also find clothing in the trunk. Despite all of these clues, weeks would then go by, and no more leads.
Have you seen this man? He's Ron Rudin, a 64-year-old realtor well known in Las Vegas.
In January of 1995, the trustees of Ron's estate put out a $25,000 reward for information leading to his whereabouts.
And he was gone. No one ever saw him again until he was found.
And a little ways up the hill, they found a bracelet, and it spelled out Ron in like diamonds.
When this happened, it was kind of a big deal.
Okay, here we are about 60 miles southeast of Las Vegas, near Lake Mojave, at a place called Nelson's Landing. And this is where, on January 23rd of 1995, in the middle of the night, some fishermen were walking back up after it started raining, and they walked up in this area.
Well, that was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, to think of him that way.
So, Greg, what else was found up there?
Okay, well, Ryan, you're standing by where they found Ron's remains, most of them, and then up here was Ron's gold bracelet, and it was unique because it had his name Ron, R-O-N, spelled out in diamonds.
And that bracelet was Ron Rudin. There it was, Ron. written right on it.
They found the burned out old trunk. There was some belts, metal belts that had wrapped around the trunk.
What we believe is the body in the truck had been placed there.
To tell a story. The skull, the bracelet, the Cadillac, it's all left there intentionally. You know what? It's an old mob movie. They automatically assume when a spouse is killed, the other spouse is guilty. Of course they should have investigated Margaret, but their total focus should not have been on Margaret.
And that trunk they found at the crime scene, they're convinced it came from Margaret's antique shop.
The trunk did become crucial because humpback trunk at the store.
So I'm thinking about Margaret. She's slim, maybe, I don't know, 120 pounds.
Right.
In your mind, would it have been possible for her to dump the body here?
I don't think so. I think it would be difficult for a strong man to do it because you're talking about way up there on the hill and then dragging everything down.
I don't think that Margaret could have loaded the body in a trunk by herself. I think there was someone that helped her.
And they come up with her supposed boyfriend, Yehuda Sharon. So what they do is put both of them under surveillance.
The theory was that Margaret shot him while he slept, and that she called Yehuda and asked him to help.
He had rented his van, and he had taken the back seat out. And therefore the theory was that somehow Margaret got Sharon involved in moving the body.
Sharon's story was he was going to go to his part-time job in California. He ended up turning around and coming back to Las Vegas.
When you look at how much mileage Sharon had put on that rented van, could his story that he went partway to California be true, or did he go to Nelson's Landing? Either's possible.
Yeah, Mr. Sharon had an alibi.
He claimed he had nothing to do with it, and his girlfriend at the time told investigators that she was with him the weekend that Ron was reported missing. It all checked out.
There's no proof of Yehuda's involvement in this. He portrayed this as a witch hunt, you know, that they were out to get Margaret and he got sucked into this.
I have no proof of that. I'm convinced that he had far more knowledge than he let on.
You can see how they looked at things and they tried to fit it in their narrative. Oh, well, she has an antique store. He rented a van. Oh, he must have been involved in it, even though he had an alibi.
Call from a handyman who told a remarkable story.
Augustine Lovato tells investigators how he was hired by Margaret Rudin to clean up their home. That information would actually lead to Augustine Lovato receiving a $25,000 reward. He thought potentially was blood.
When he talked about, he could hear this gurgling. It's a drain. You put it in, it drains out. You can find blood afterwards, fine, but it's not going to be gurgling 4 days later or an hour later.
Well, it's awfully strange that your missing persons detectives were out here. They didn't see any blood. How did Lovato see something that wasn't there however many days before?
She hired Lovato to remodel the bedroom, but Ron was still just a missing person at that time. It wasn't a homicide case.
He tells police that while Ron was missing, Margaret hired him to make some changes in the house.
I wasn't renovating the house. I knew I was going to need a way to make a living if he didn't come back, so that I could support myself. I decided I could open a tea shop that I had already talked to Ron about, and everything in there was going to be antiques that I could sell. I wish I'd have been able to do it. It would have been a success. The trustees had left me with no choice.
They cut off Margaret's money. She was getting a small paycheck from Ron's business. They cut that off.
The trustees named in Ron's will justify it by saying they're simply carrying out Ron's specific directive, that no one gets any money who caused his death by violent means.
It was really, really petty. After Ron's disappearance, they immediately took over the trust. By New Year's Eve, they had already cut me out of everything. I no longer have my shop in Ron's property, so they were letting me have a message. They were in control, and they intended to make me penniless, and they succeeded.
There's no forensics that ever puts Margaret.
Piece of physical evidence that investigators desperately need miraculously shows up.
It's 1 year after Ron's death, and Margaret is fighting two big battles. One, the trustees of her husband's estate, his $12 million estate, are keeping her from getting any money. Secondly, she's under suspicion for murder.
And she's just being bled dry. I mean, she's got no income. They're trashing her name everywhere.
The newspapers even were saying, first time a murder case is going to be settled in a civil trial against Margaret Rudin.
It was right before she was to testify. From a criminal perspective, we were really looking forward to her testimony. That was going to be very, very telling.
If the trustees can convince the civil courts that she, Margaret, in fact is responsible for the death of her husband, she will not be entitled to any of the $12 million.
Ron trusted me. He wanted me to have a part of the inheritance because each time that he redid his trust, he increased my percentage by 20%. He would not have kept increasing the percentage if he had any doubts about me whatsoever, or if we had a bad marriage. He wouldn't have.
The battle ends up just basically fizzling out. Margaret ends up settling for $600,000. And if you take out the $429,000 that she owes her attorneys, far cry from the millions that she was set to inherit if indeed he had died of natural causes or she wasn't under any suspicion.
This was a very tricky investigation, and the police struggled for a long time to discern exactly how Ron was murdered. And they suspected he'd been shot while he was sleeping, but they never had the murder weapon.
This lake has changed a lot since 1994 when Ron disappeared. And out here is where they found the gun. This is Lake Mead, and this is Pyramid Island. July 21st of 1996, scuba divers used to have scuba schools here. And so one day, some scuba divers noticed some debris 10 to 15 feet out from the shore. They swam down there and brought it out, and it was a .22 caliber gun with a built-in silencer, and it was wrapped.
It to police.
Now here's the thing. The gun sat in police storage for about a year.
It's now 1997, 2 years after the murder of Ron Rudin. There is still no indictment against Margaret. One of the detectives remembers, we need to look at that gun found in Lake Mead.
In the actual crime scene itself.
The problem with that is they can't connect the murder weapon to Margaret. They can't ever put the gun in Margaret's hand.
Doesn't stop investigators from trying to do so. Ron had actually sent a letter to police saying, hey, one of my guns from my gun collection is missing. But what it did do was lead police to believe that it must have been Margaret who took that gun that was then missing.
Ron had left a report with ATF indicating that that gun had turned up missing about the time that he and Margaret had separated.
I think it's a stretch to argue that
he had at least 1,000 guns in there. Thomas machine guns from the 30s, shelves that were at angles so you could see every single one of them clearly in view.
It was the firearm recovered at the bottom of Lake Mead that pushed this thing over the edge.
Ron's car found at the Crazy Horse, the trunk found in the desert, the handyman story, none of it was enough to indict Margaret Rudin. But now there's a gun. And it's a gun they believe was the one used to kill Ron, taken by Margaret.
Now they have what they've been trying to get for years.
I think with that, that was the piece that they felt that they needed to go to a grand jury. We found the gun. And then 3 years after the disappearance of Mr. Rudin, Margaret is indicted.
Here comes the interesting part now. They called Margaret's attorney, and they said, hey, guess what? We got a murder warrant for Margaret, and we need her to turn herself in. And the attorney promptly said, I don't know where she is. She's disappeared.
That no.
Police were flabbergasted.
Sometime toward the end of March of 1997, Margaret finally got fed up with everything. She was running out of money, couldn't get a job because she was the Black Widow of Las Vegas. Well, she left before she was ever indicted, and there's no crime about leaving and going anywhere if you're not under indictment.
Margaret got scared. She could tell it wasn't going in a good direction for her.
At that time, I think I was so ready for a nervous breakdown, I didn't think that far ahead. Just wanted to get out of Vegas.
She went on the lam.
You spot Margaret Rudin, call our hotline.
She outsmarted all of them. She knew how to stay alive.
And if I told you what happened next, you wouldn't believe it.
They automatically assume when a spouse is killed, the other spouse is guilty. Love makes the world go round, but money greases the wheel.
There's no sign of Ron Rudin.
And he was gone.
Margaret Rudin, dubbed the Black Widow of Las Vegas.
The Nevada Black Widow.
They never checked on anyone but me.
You spot Margaret Rudin, call our hotline at 1-800-CRIME-TV.
She had at least 2, if not 3 wigs. And then we came across several IDs.
She went on the lam. She outsmarted all of them.
Boogie, how often could you be that lucky?
Margaret just doesn't know that luck is going to run out.
42 years. That is the worst trial that I've ever had.
You were wrong doing that. It's unfair to Mrs. Rudin, Judge. Listen to me.
They had no evidence. They had no witnesses.
There's no fingerprints, DNA, no forensics.
It was a circus.
My right side. Whole body would have to go this way. I made a ruling and it sticks.
This was just a travesty of justice, and I was part of that travesty.